Welcome to DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
It's your boy Andy, and welcome back to the DeFi Slate YouTube channel. Smash the like button on this video, that really helps us out, and sit back and enjoy the content. Thank you very much.
What is going on, DeFi Slate fam? Welcome back to the DeFi by Design podcast. Today with Greg Tanaka, and we are super stoked to be talking to Greg as a public figure who is running for Congress, and we'll dig into more about his policy and his expectations and journey along the way. Greg also has a protocol live on the Avalanche chain, and we'll cover his experience as a builder in the space as well, and how that crosses over to some of the public impacts that he's looking to make in a congressional setting. Greg, it's awesome to have you on, man.
Thank you, Rob. I'm so excited to be on DeFi Slate. Really appreciate it.
Super. Well, yeah, let's start at the beginning. Kind of take us through your journey leading to crypto. How did you find crypto? And what were your initial impressions? And we'll kind of go from there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, Rob, I knew about crypto really early. So I started with Bitcoin way back when they had a faucet. I mean, it was 10 plus years ago now, and they're literally giving away Bitcoin at the time. And I think when it hit like $10, I was so excited. I sold everything. And looking back on it, it's like one of the regrets I have in life. But so I've been an early user of it, more of a hobbyist dabbler, and I had no idea it would be as big as it is now. And so that's kind of my first start, was just literally with the Bitcoin faucet. That was like the first kind of real experience with it, and then just been more of a hobbyist kind of as time gone on. And more recently, as DeFi stuff started coming online, I started getting really interested in it, because when you have all these different utility tokens all working together as this ecosystem, suddenly I think the crypto, Bitcoin, Ethereum, all this becomes actually a lot more useful. And I know there's a lot of Bitcoin maximalists out there, and I understand why their point of view, but I think the ecosystem is what makes this really strong, because pretty much there's a token for everything, right? Whether it's buying a house, or you need Wi-Fi access, like with, or you needed insurance, or you need just about anything you could think of. There's a token for it now, and I think all this kind of, and with all the bridges to everything, it's finally become really practical and useful. So it's exciting times, and yeah. So right now, working on the Mosaic protocol. And what it is it's on an Avalanche chain, and what it does is it uses machine learning to rebalance between different crypto assets. And we will forecast the price of those assets, and then also what protocol would have the highest yield. So we would put them on like Snowball or Trader Joe, and we'll move them around every hour depending on what we forecast the APY will be. So, yeah, it's a really exciting time. So I actually think that crypto has such a big future, especially decentralized finance, because I see that just about everything that's happening in the traditional finance industry is happening in the DeFi world, only a lot faster, a lot more innovation. And if you look at the percentage of the economy that the traditional financial industry takes, it's a huge chunk. Something like, I read something like 10 to 20% of the U.S. economy is... the financial industry makes up about 10 to 20% of the U.S. economy. So, I mean, this is your Visas, right? Taking that 3% off of each sale. This is your, Schwab. So I have Schwab, and they charge me, 25% or so on my credit card, and then they give me 0.2% interest rates on my savings account, right? So this incredible 10x spread margin that they get. And I think the promise with DeFi is that you can greatly reduce the load on the U.S. economy, right? Because so much of the GDP goes towards these financial companies. And you look at what are they doing, right? They're just basically moving numbers on a spreadsheet. So I think the promise of DeFi is that those margins will get a lot thinner. So Schwab, instead of 100x margin, there'll be something a lot less, right? So the people actually doing things actually benefit more. And plus, I think there's a lot more new financial vehicles out there because of the fact that you have smart contracts. You can do things that you can never really do in the traditional finance industry. So I think there's so much innovation and potential available. And so I'm very excited. I mean, this is truly a new form of money that will, I think, turbocharge our economy.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into some of the policy that is enabled through smart contracts. That's where I want to kind of direct our conversation in terms of, one, your initiative to run for public office.
Yeah.
We see, several anonymous developers and a philosophy in the space that is get off the grid. Users choose to interact with these protocols kind of hands off. They want to contribute to the ecosystem, but not necessarily capture the recognition that might come from contributing to a project. The case in point being 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗵𝗃𝗀𝗀 kind of leaving the ecosystem last week. He's a major developer, and he contributed to several different projects. I'd say 20 plus protocols. He was a core contributor and a lead developer to, and it seemed like the drama and the expectations surrounding his work got to be overwhelming, and he chose to leave. Maybe he's going to continue to contribute to the ecosystem through an anonymous profile, or maybe he's completely hands off. Either way, it's an indication of kind of this shadowy super coder type of mentality that underscores a lot of the cryptocurrency ecosystem. You're taking a completely different route, looking to bring cryptocurrency and the innovation of smart contracts more to light in a more public and pronounced way. What was your motivation? What really pushed you to contribute to the ecosystem in this public manner?
Well, first of all, right now I'm currently on the Palo Alto City Council. So I'm a elected official here in Palo Alto, California. And one of the motivations for me to run for city council, and this was back in 2016, is the mayor at the time was trying to ban software development. So he made the cover of New York Times saying, Mayor of Palo Alto, this is where Facebook started, Google started, HP, right? All these iconic companies started. And for me to ban software development was crazy. So at the time I was running a SaaS company, software as a service company, and I thought that was crazy, right? I thought, how could you ban software development? It's such a fundamental, this is kind of like, this is what created Palo Alto, is technology. And software is a big part of it. So that was my motivation to run for city council. And when I won, the very first thing I did was I worked to legalize software development. And a similar experience happened to me with crypto. So, right now I run a DeFi crypto startup. And basically, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the infrastructure bill.
Somewhat, just kind of loosely with the implications of some of the broker-dealer classifications of crypto and the requirements of reporting some of these transactions that seem to be overreaching. I'm sure you can explain a bit further.
Yeah. So the infrastructure bill, the idea behind it was to help the country recover from COVID and also make a bunch of investments in infrastructure that the country needs. So the big idea was probably okay, but the big issue was they snuck in some provisions around crypto, which has nothing to do with infrastructure. It had literally nothing. It was just like something inserted in by the Treasury Department. And what this did was it basically required everyone to disclose who the counterparty is. So let's say you're a DeFi developer, you develop a Solidity contract. You're supposed to disclose who's using that Solidity contract, right? And that's literally impossible, right? You don't know who the counterparty is. You're just a guy writing Solidity, right? and yet and if you don't disclose who the counterparty is, that means if you don't disclose the person's real name, their social security number, their address, which you literally don't have because it's all an anonymous, trustless environment, you face $25,000 fine and/or a 5-year prison sentence, right? So it's a felony, right? If you're a NFT artist and you develop art, right, and you're supposed to, and you sell it, you're supposed to report who the counterparty is, right? You're supposed to issue them 1099s, and if you don't, again, you face prison time, right? If if you're a miner, right, you're mining Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever, right, you're helping to validate it, you're supposed to also report to counterparties, right? And so there's all these situations where it's literally impossible to report to counterparty, yet the infrastructure bill basically has this requirement. And I understand why the Treasury Department is trying to do this. They're doing this because they want to make sure that everyone's paying their taxes, right? So if they get everyone to disclose all the other counterparties, theoretically they could triangulate everything and figure out who's not paying their taxes. But the problem, and I'm not saying we should not pay our taxes, but the problem is that it's impossible to comply with how crypto is structured, right? So basically what happens is there's a knife on all of our heads, right, hanging over our heads, that, in any day, somebody could pick us up and say, oh, you didn't file, right? You didn't disclose who your counterparties were and all these different transactions. And so I think, whether I don't really think they're necessarily going to enforce it, right? Because it's going to be really hard to. But I think what it allows them to do, it allows them to arbitrarily pick anyone they feel like and take them out, which I think is scary. And what this is going to cause is it's going to cause the industry to go underground. So that's not a good situation. So one of the first things I want to do is I want to make sure that this is fixed, right? This crazy provision is fixed because it's a law that nobody can comply with. It doesn't make sense. I mean, the one thing that people don't quite understand about crypto is that it's all on a blockchain. In fact, it's probably more transparent. You may not know who the person is, but you see the transactions. There was that, all that money stolen from, I think that couple, right, that, something, I forgot how many billions of dollars, but that couple stole that billions of dollars, and they were able to trace it because it's all in the blockchain, right? Even they tried laundering the money, and it's really, really hard. So, I think a lot of the rules that apply to the traditional money system, where the dollar bill really is not traceable, it's really hard to trace that money, doesn't make sense in the crypto world because it's automatically traced. It's a permanent track record of what happened, right? That cannot be altered or changed. And in some ways, it's way more secure than the U.S. dollar, right? Because of that. And yet you have these rules which are kind of oriented towards trying to avoid, tax cheats, right? Or trying to make sure the tax cheats can get away with not paying taxes, but it's impractical, right? And it's going to stifle the industry. So that was my motivation. I think there's so much promise with crypto. There's so much promise in terms of increasing our financial efficiency. I think this will really turbocharge our economy through crypto. And yet we have these things like the infrastructure bill, which has these crazy anti-crypto provisions, and you have members of Congress who are just not supportive, right? So the current Congress member in my area, she'll be 80 this year. She voted for this, and it's disappointing, right? It's disappointing. This is Silicon Valley. This is where we're supposed to have a lot of innovation, and to have a Congress member who doesn't support innovation, to me, is a total travesty.
Yeah, and to introduce a very controversial for our demographic, those who support crypto, to introduce that literature into a bill that really has nothing to do with crypto at all.
Nothing to do with crypto, yeah.
Yeah, it was for infrastructure, and frankly, I supported, building some of the infrastructure, not so much the inflationary, consequences that might come along with that, but
yeah.
The general scope of that infrastructure bill seemed to be supportive and bring the country into a scenario where it was a little bit more it was farther along than how far back Corona set us from an economic point of view. And and we're seeing something potentially similar with the most recent executive order from President Biden, right? He put out this order, which seemed to be, rather open and receptive to regulation and cryptocurrency getting incorporated into some traditional financial mechanisms. The executive order mentioned central bank digital currencies and the possibility of that in the U.S. But after that executive order, I started seeing kind of these I don't want to call them bandwagoners, but I guess opportunists, where they want to piggyback on this bill and start to draw conclusions. And I think the one that I saw was Elizabeth Warren, who was looking to trace transactions and get a much deeper sense of who's sending these transactions, and really an invasion of privacy into some of these transactions as a result of the bill kind of providing a foothold to gain that information. So we're seeing these opportunities start to grasp and piggyback on already controversial legislation. It kind of opens the door to just say, it's clear that we need education. We need these influential congresswomen and those in office to have a deeper understanding of what is enforceable, and through that, what really should be part of a legislature to regulate cryptocurrency, and what should be left to maybe a Wild West or a more open, free sort of decentralized finance. What's your take on kind of the most recent executive order and how the overlap between traditional finance and decentralized finance ends up playing out?
Yeah, good question. So I think fundamentally at the highest level, we need legislation and legislators for the digital age. Unfortunately, if you look at the average age of members of Congress, it's, I think, near the 70s, right? It's like way older than the retirement age of people actually working, right? So you have to, I think that's the first issue, is that I'm not sure these people have a good grasp on technology. And also, I think that it's hard for them to kind of keep up with what's really going on and having a good understanding about what's good policy.
Yeah.
I think the executive order in general.
Sorry to interrupt real quick. They're almost a bit intimidated by the technology, probably as a result of not understanding it, and they're meeting this potentially innovative technology that could really benefit their constituents. They're meeting it with resistance, and it's closing doors. It's closing their mind.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that we need a fresh perspective in Congress. And so I'm hoping that there will be new members voted in who have a more open and tech-savvy kind of perspective, right? So that the policies that come through make sense, right? They're practical. They're ones that can actually be implemented. The ones that people can actually follow, right? It's like saying, oh, you're not allowed to breathe. I mean, it's kind of a law like that. That makes no sense. It makes zero sense. Now, with the recent executive order that was signed, so I think that's actually kind of exciting. It shows some progress. I think the central bank digital currency is kind of interesting. I mean, I can understand why the government wants it, because it gives them incredible control and incredible insight as to who's using what. But there's a lot of privacy issues with CBDCs. For China, of course, they absolutely want this, right? They want to be able, it's a authoritarian government, so they want to be able to control where the currency is used and, who's using it and all this kind of stuff. And, if you look at Canada, right, they had the trucker strike, and then they started shutting down everyone's bank account. So a CBDC, you could do that really easily with a CBDC, right? So I'm a little bit mixed on a CBDC, because I actually believe that there should be a separation of money and state. So I don't know if but when the founding of this country, we had the separation of religion and state, which I think was great, because a lot of countries, the religion was kind of mixed in with the laws, right, with the government. And so it was, you had all these kind of arbitrary things because religion was mixed in. And when they separated out religion and state, I think things became much, much better for everyone. You could practice whatever religion you wanted, and the government laws weren't biased by some sort of religion. But I think the same thing is the case with money. So in the past, money had to be done by the government because you had to make sure that people weren't counterfeiting it. You had to have enforcement of the laws, of contracts. There was no practical way. But today, money, like one of my investors from Andreessen Horst, Mark Andreessen, has this famous saying that software is eating the world. And I think software has eaten money. So with crypto, you don't need to have an army to enforce a contract, right? A smart contract will be automatically executed by software, right? There's no standing armies needed, no court systems needed, right? You don't need a police officer to enforce it. You don't need a secret service to make sure that people are not counterfeiting. So all this kind of government apparatus that you needed for traditional money supply, which you need to do when you're just printing, ink on paper and calling it money, right? You needed to have all this infrastructure. You need to have all this cost and all this energy spent to support the fiat system. But with a cryptocurrency, you don't have to. It's done in software. And so I think that there's a possibility now to actually have a separation of money and state. And I think that's actually really important because I'm not sure, Rob, if you ever heard of Ray Dalio. He's, I think, the CEO of Bridgewater. So he talks about these, the rise and falls of different empires. And, he kind of shows the chart of like the Dutch Empire and the British Empire and, all these other empires of the past 500 years. And they all follow the same curve, right? And what happens is on the downside of the curve is there's like the government that prints money like crazy, and there's like massive inflation, and basically the country disintegrates. And I think the United States is amazing. I think so much innovation has come here. I would love for the United States I would like to delay the fall of our empire, so to speak. I like for the United States to remain number one, but right now, like Robbie, you kind of alluded to it, but inflation is at 40-year high, right? I think I saw a stat out there that 40% of the dollars in circulation right now, 4 out of $10, have been printed over the past year and a half, 2 years, right? And so, like here in California, we hit $6.50 for the cheapest, for regular gasoline, $6.50, right? I mean, premium's like $7 already. And
right now,
so,
a gallon of gas, real gas, costs more than a transaction of Ethereum gas.
That's right. That's right.
It's like $4 to get a transaction through on mainnet, and gas is, like you said, $6.50 a gallon.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I think we need to prevent the debasement of our currency. I mean, this is the number one sign that happens when empires fall, right? Ray Dalio showed this happening with all the prior empires that rose and fell. Was it always ends with, the central government printing money like crazy, trying to prop things up. You get these asset bubbles going on, and eventually the bubble pops, right, and it just collapses. And I don't want that for our country. So in order to do that, we need to have sound money. We need to make sure that there's not this kind of distortion in our economy, because when there's distortions, it hurts the productivity of the country, right? If you think about what money is just a way to keep score. There's no value in money itself. It's just a way to allocate resources. And if you have distortions in the money supply, what happens is the productivity of the economy gets hurt, right? And the real wealth of an economy is what it produces. And so you want to have a sound money supply so that the signals, right, and that will direct what needs to be produced are clear, right, are not distorted by inflation. And right now we're having inflation that we haven't seen since the 1980s, right? It's record high inflation. And so this can cause a lot of distortions and a lot of financial pain. And it really hurts the people on the lowest part of our social and economic ladder, because they tend to get most of their compensation in cash, and most of their savings are in cash, right? Versus the people on the other end of the spectrum, the really rich, most of their wealth is not in cash, it's in assets, right? Most of their compensation, like look at Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, he gets $1 salary, right? Most of his compensation is in stock. And so it's this incredibly regressive tax, and it creates this bigger divide between the have and have-nots. And so it's something which I think we need to have this sound money supply. And in crypto, to me, I think, I wish, the executive order said that cryptocurrency could be legal tender. That's what I want, right? So if I get elected to Congress, I want cryptocurrency to be legal tender. There's no good reason why it shouldn't be. I think we should also have a capital gains holiday on cryptocurrency. So like if you go from Bitcoin to ETH to Tether to, your favorite cryptocurrency token, you're directly supposed to be paying capital gains tax on all of that. But how the hell do you do that? Like what is the capital gains tax going from BTC to ETH? I mean, come on. Like, how are you supposed to figure that out, right? And so I think, I look at the internet. So in the internet in the early or mid 90s, there was no sales tax on e-commerce, right? In fact, there was a kind of a holiday on sales tax for e-commerce for the first decade and a half or so. And it really allowed the industry to flourish. Now, the reason why the government did it wasn't because they didn't want to tax, it was because they didn't know how to tax it, right? It was too hard for them to tax versus from traditional, brick and mortar point of sales type of thing. And so we're kind of the same situation with Bitcoin. So I actually believe that we should not have any capital gains tax on cryptocurrency. We should allow this to flourish, because if we have a sound money supply, we'll have a really great economy, right? The economy is really tanks when you start mucking around with. It's like when I was a kid, I used to play Monopoly with one of my friends, and he liked to be banker, right? And he would always slip himself extra money, and so it was just like, and it ruins the whole game, right? When the money supply is distorted, right, by people who are cheating, and basically what the government is doing by printing money is they're cheating, right? They're basically. I saw another stat that I think like 46,000. I think the average hit to the family in terms of what inflation has done during COVID has been something like $47,000 per capita or per family. I forgot what it was, but the amount of money that the government gave to families, and not everyone got it, right? Like if you make too much, you didn't get it. It was like $4,000. So they stole. Okay, with inflation and by printing money, they basically stole like 10 times more than they gave you, right? And so it's this craziness, right? It's like an illegal tax on society that's incredibly regressive. It creates a bigger gulf between the have and have-nots, right? And so we need to stop this, right? I think this is so, and I think it's a tendency of all governments to do this, to just print money like crazy when they're trying to keep things propped up, and that's what we're trying to do, right? What we should have done when we're supply constrained is we shouldn't be like, I understand COVID. We don't want like a global depression, so I understand why we wanted to create some stimulus. But when you're inherently have less supply, like, and I also explain to my kids, like, what is inflation? I said, imagine our household we were producing 2 bananas, right? And we have $10. If suddenly we have $20, it's not like the household is getting richer. We only have 2 bananas. Our wealth is what we produce. It's not how much dollars there are, right? And so what we should have done is stimulate up to the supply chain capacity, right? Because anything more is just inflationary. It's not helping, right? But instead, a bunch of people are sitting at home getting paid. Nothing more is being produced. So only thing that happens, because the wealth, again, is what's being produced. All that happens is we get this crazy inflation, right? And it's distorting to the economy. It's something which is basically eroding the foundation of this country. And right now, the United States is lucky to be the reserve currency, but as we debase our currency, and for that matter, look at what we're doing with Russia. I think what Russia is doing is terrible. But the sanctions also, you got to imagine the next country like China. They're going to really think really hard. Do they want to use the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, right? And so I think, and this is what happens to the fall of all empires, is that they lose the reserve currency status, the global reserve currency, and so it's scary because I've lived in this country. My great grandfather came to this country in 1880, right? So it's I think the greatest country on earth and the best system, but we are basically eroding the foundation of this country with what we're doing to the money supply. we're using it as a weapon, which I understand why we do it, because we can, but it's it may cause the sun to set on America, right? Which I don't think is a good thing. So I think we need to shore things up, because we have to think about the next generation as well, right?
Yeah, like you mentioned, the 40-year high inflation mark. If you didn't get a 7% raise this year, you ended up losing money.
Well, you need more than a 7%, because, I think it's like 7.5%. But I think here's the weird thing is, you look at how they measure CPI, right? The Consumer Price Index, it changes all the time. If you use what they used like back in 1980, it would be way higher, right? Way higher inflation. And so some people look at the stable coins and go, oh wow, how does Gemini give 8%, or how does BlockFi give 9%, or whatever it is, right? How do they and why does Wells Fargo and Schwab give like sub 1%? The reality is because generally the savings rate has to be higher than inflation. So the fact that Gemini offers like 0.5% higher than rate of inflation is not that tremendous. What's really tremendous is how the government, if you look at the Treasury Department and the balance sheet, they're piling on debt like you can't believe, right? Because our big trading partners like China, they don't want to buy our debt anymore. It's basically like, okay, I'm getting all this paper, but it's not worth anything, right? So they stopped accepting it, right? And so this is causing our country to lose the reserve currency status. It's a great privilege to have this, and what's happening is that it's basically handing it to China. China is going to become the reserve. The digital yuan is going to be the reserve currency, and then maybe one day we'll get the, if China doesn't like what we're doing, they'll shut us off with their CBDC, right? It will go the other way, and so that's the danger. And so I think for us, we need to have a separation between money and state, and the cryptocurrency allows us to have a efficient economy and not get threatened one day by someone else's reserve currency. Right now, today, we are the reserve currency, so we don't like Russia, we can shut them down. But as we lose that reserve currency, and I'm worried that we're going to lose it in my lifetime, which is really not great, right? And certainly in my kids' lifetime. And so we should get ahead of this, and this is why we should really embrace crypto rather than push against it. I think what Biden did in his executive order is a nice baby step in that direction, but it's not enough, right? There's so much more that we need to do. We need to allow DAOs to be legal entities, not just in Wyoming, but it should be decentralized autonomous organizations. Those things should be legal entities. They're as good as a paper C corp, right? Why not? Why not? In fact, it's probably better than a paper C corp, right? Because the contract is all in software, right? You don't need a court system to enforce the contract or the bylaws of the corporation. The bylaws are baked into software, right? Yeah. And so, there's that. We should allow the copyrights to ride with NFTs, right? There's so many different things that we should do to embrace a modern digital economy, and this would increase our economic productivity, and this will help rise our boats. Because the only way we help, there's two ways to help. We could take the pie we have and just divide up into different slices. We could redistribute, right? But the other way to do it is to grow the pie, and we grow the pie by making the economy a lot more efficient. Because there's that 10 to 20% that the financial industry sucks out of the economy, and for doing what? Moving numbers on a spreadsheet. That's all they're really doing. Like, what value are they adding? Why do they take so much for doing so little, right? In cryptocurrency, you don't have to worry about paying some.
Yeah, cutting up the pizza doesn't create more pizza; it just creates more slices. And the output of the economy as a numerator and just printing more money as a denominator is just taking the same output and spreading it amongst more and more dollars, inflating the currency, which each dollar is now worth less, as it is. It's a lesser denomination of that output, and that's what we're seeing is as you mentioned it, the term is debasement as we inflate the currency, and in the reality of the ecosystem that we have now, both traditional and decentralized, we haven't seen a separation of money and state. And kind of building on that foundation, on that principle of separating money and state, it's, one inclination is that we're kind of opening the window for the robber, right? Like, if we choose to accept Bitcoin and decentralized technology and really bring about a tokenized economy with separation of money and state, does that remove the reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar, more intentionally?
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is that you can only print so much money, right? Because we become the reserve currency because of our position, right? Of our position in the world order. But as we lose that, right? As we have more and more debt, as more and more trading partners say, we're not going to buy U.S. Treasury bonds, right? It's such a bad deal, like negative interest rates, right? Why do I want to do this? It's basic economics, right? As you print more money and your money becomes worth less and less people are going to be willing to hold it, right? And where are they going to put their money in? They're probably going to put it into the yuan, right? Because they're having trade surpluses, right? And the value of yuan is actually increasing. Or they're going to go to cryptocurrencies as themselves. So it's something where I think we cannot. I think, and especially as we use money as a weapon, right? Because money wasn't intended to be a weapon. Money is supposed to be a way to allocate resources. It's a way to allocate the production of inside an economy. But we're using it as a way that was never really intended in some ways. And by doing that, we weaken it. And not to say that, this is not good, we don't want to help what's happening in Ukraine, because, we saw what happened in World War II with Hitler, right? So I'm not opposed to that per se, but it has consequences, right? And the consequence is that every little bit we chip away at the dollar's foundation, we lose the reserve currency status, right? More debt we pile onto our balance sheet. The more people don't want to hold our, like, heck, I live here, I don't want to buy our treasury bonds. It's like such a bad deal, right? Who wants to do that? You have to be insane to do that.
And how do we solve this? The problem is clearly inflation and debasement of the currency, eventually leading to losing the reserve currency status of the world. And kind of like what you pointed to, that's how other empires have fallen. How do we solve this? What does it look like in a world with separation of money and state?
So what I think will happen is we're actually going to see an increase in our economic productivity. So as we move to a sound money supply, we'll see a productivity increase, and so the pie will grow, which is great. What it does mean also is, and I think 𝗿𝗿𝗀𝗋𝗋 said it really well, which is, and it's something which we all know as individuals, but as a country we don't know, is you can't spend more than you make. Okay, it's as simple as that, right? Whenever you spend more than you make, you basically and you make up for it by just printing money. It's basically inflation, right? It's a pretty simple solution, right? And so, ideally, of course, we want to do the infrastructure bill, and we want to do the Build Back Better, and we want to, send $500 million to Ukraine, and we want to, $500 billion. I forgot how much. Well, maybe 500 million, some enormous amount of money. There's all these things we want to do, but, as an individual that cannot print your own money, right? You don't have your own printing press. You know that you cannot spend more than you have. You just cannot, right? But that discipline is not in government, right? Because it's easy to do what my friend did when I played a Monopoly, and he could take money from the bank. He could cheat, basically, right? It's easy for the government to cheat because they control the printing press, but it has long-term consequences. Maybe short-term it's good, right? So short-term, like politically, it's good because everyone seems to be happy. Like, oh, here's extra money. Just print some extra, just let the printers go a little bit longer, and everything's good. But long term, it's destroying the foundation of this country. That's what it's doing, and it hurts the economic productivity of the country as well because you have these distortions. Capitalism and money is amazing because if you look at like China, so China in the 1980s, it was broke, right? People were starving. I remember people used to adopt babies out of China because they were so poor. It was like mass starvation, right? And when China moved to a capitalistic system for their economy, they went from being one of the poorest countries to now they're like they're likely to pass us now in terms of GDP output. And same people, right? The only difference is that capitalism works, right? I mean, there's a lot of faults with capitalism, but it works, right? I mean, communism, we say we're going to just deliberately divide up the pie into this equal slices among everyone, does not work, right? The problem is that communism is not with human nature, right? Why would you want to work so hard if you get paid the same as the guy next to you who does nothing, right? And the answer is you don't, right? And so the economic productivity is hurt. And the nice thing about capitalism is that it aligns incentives, aligns with human nature, right? And that's why there's more economic productivity. And so you got to focus on economic productivity. We got to focus on not spending more than we have. And it's really hard. You know, I'm on the Palo Alto City Council, and I'm one of the rare people that actually vote against things because politically, it's not easy, right? So I voted. We were building a new police building, and you know, we were trying to decide whether we were going to spend money on a fingerprint art, right? This big fingerprint art, right? And I forgot exactly how much it was. I think it was like 400,000 or 500, maybe it was 600,000. It was like a lot of money. It was like hundreds of thousands of dollars for fingerprint art. And you know, our city actually is losing money, right? Our Palo Alto, while you know historically has been very wealthy, we really took it on the chin because a lot of people are working from home. They're not coming to our city anymore, so our revenue is down a lot. So do we really need to be spending money on fingerprint art, or could we just maybe put up the art from our kids from the local junior high school or elementary school, and is that good enough, right? Do we need to have such fancy artwork for our police station? I don't know, but nobody else wanted to vote against it except for me. And the reason why is because you vote against things, people get mad at you. So the guy that I voted against it, and the guy who really wanted it, said he's gonna make it his, it's like super mad at me. He's trying everything in his power to try to get back to me on it, right? And so people don't like to do it because you make enemies. But that's what we need. We need people with backbone, right? We need people to be able to say, well, no, actually, we have a massive revenue drop. Maybe rather than paying for all this money for fingerprint art, maybe we should, try to balance our budget. Maybe we shouldn't take from reserves. Maybe we should not cut our police department. If we cut our police department, we have like record crime right now, right? So maybe we should focus on what's really needed. But it's hard. As politicians, the politicians have every incentive to maximize short-term gain so they get reelected and delay the long-term pain, right? Yeah. But eventually you have to pay for it though. And so to me, that's one of the big reasons why I'm running is because I think we should be doing the right thing, right? Not necessarily like I'm not a professional politician. During the day I'm pretty much a tech entrepreneur in the crypto space, right? But I believe in this country and I want this country to do well. And so I vote not just on what is easy politically, right? Because what's easy politically is to approve every single spending project on earth, right? That's what's easy politically. You make a lot of friends that way. And I will not do that. And so I've made a lot of enemies because I refuse to do that. I mean, us as elected leaders, we need to make choices. That's why we're elected. We need to make choices as to what's really needed. And some of those choices have to be, or will be unpopular. But why are we serving, right? Are we serving just for being elected? I mean, if I get elected to the House of Representatives for Congress, I'll make a lot less than I make now, right? I mean, you don't do it for the money, unless you're Nancy Pelosi, right? If you're Nancy Pelosi, then you could, I think our Speaker of the House, she's worth $500 million now, right? So she was, way poor before, and now she's worth, she's one of the wealthiest people in the country, right? So unless you do a Nancy Pelosi type thing, there's really no money in politics. So if you're doing this, you should do it for the right reasons, right? You should do it to maximize the benefit to society, not just what gets you elected. And this is what this corruption is what bugs the hell out of me, right? Is that we don't have people with backbone, people who just purely want the votes, not what's right for this country, right? And what's right for this country is not saying yes to everything, right? You can't say yes to every single spending bill on earth. You simply can't. Because the way you're making up with it is printing money. It's debasing the currency. It's eroding the foundation of this country. And it's making it so that our children, even not even our children, even people that are alive today, is basically eroding away their wealth.
Yeah,
and it's not right.
And, yeah. Nancy Pelosi was, clearly one of the top traders this last bull cycle.
She should open her own hedge fund. She is like, I mean,
right?
yeah. So this corruption is intolerable, right? It's
Yeah,
not.
of course she's not, right? She's not a financial trader. She's not a typical portfolio manager, but yet
If she was a trader, she'd be one of the top ones in the world because nobody does.
Right.
Nobody gets
Which
that
is
kind of gain.
Yeah, evidence is her like you said, corruption and the leverage she employs on her connections in politically to make financial decisions, which
I don't
is
believe
about
people
as
should
clear
be.
cut corruption as you can get.
Yeah, I mean the current congressman in my area, she's been in Congress for 30 years. 30 years, right? I don't think we should have people in office so long, right? I mean it's crazy, right? Because people feel entitled, right? It doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But part of it's on the voters too. The voters have to wake up, right? They have to ask themselves, right? Am I better off now than I was, 30 years ago, right? 30 years ago, the country was, declared number one, right? Now, China will likely eclipse us in the next few years, and it's scary, right? What happened? What happened to our leadership?
Yeah, and that is a great lead into actually one of the first topics that we were talking about when we first met at ETH Denver, which was how to get more of the country involved, utilizing smart contracts.
Yeah.
The ability that smart contracts have to scale governance was one of the most impressive and seemingly beneficial innovations that smart contracts brought to the table in terms of pivoting from a representative democracy to more of a direct or delegated democracy. And that, like you said, it's about kind of the voters waking up and having to, first understand through education to make qualified decisions, and actually enforce the voting power that they have to make changes and impacts in a governance setting. And that to me was one. Actually, I was with the University Bitcoin Club up at a hackathon in Washington, D.C. when it first was somewhat apparent that there was a functional direct democracy that could be employed through smart contracts if we essentially put the country in the form of a DAO, right?
Yeah.
And DAO is such an abstract term that
Sure.
to fill that picture out a bit, it looks like each decision that's made in Congress is voted on by the broad population. And you could say, that there's citizens of the country that aren't educated on a particular topic to make an effective decision one way or another if you give the ability of everyone to vote on every decision, you're going to end up getting people that don't really know what they're talking about and making an impact. And that's where you have a delegated democracy where you can kind of delegate your vote to someone that might be more informed on that topic. But ultimately, the ability to open up each decision to the broad population of citizens in the country is really only accomplishable through the innovation of smart contracts. That level of scale wasn't available when someone had to go to the local library or box office to cast their vote. Now everyone has their phone in their pocket. That's their voting machine. If you you call everyone's social security number their voting token. Each citizen has their own vote. One citizen, one social is one vote, and they can either delegate that vote to someone else for a specific decision, or they can use that token to vote themselves. Then you open up the scale of decision making where you can actually bring the general population's opinions into the fold for a much wider breadth of decisions and legislatures that are put forth, which was seemingly a very potentially beneficial use case of smart contracts, but also a very big change compared to how our system works today. And I'm curious if this is something that you see politicians potentially embracing over the course of the next 10, 20, 50 years, or if this is a bit too radical and we won't really see a decentralized form of governance, even if it's well contained in our country's citizens.
Yeah. So, the Constitution of the United States was written hundreds of years ago, right? At a time when there was no electricity, no smartphones, no, not even a telegraph, right? And so at the time, that was the best you could do, right? The Constitution was probably the best you could do. If you were to write a Constitution today, would you do it the way they have it, right? They had this electoral college thing going on because, just practically, how do you even get people to vote, right? You have people vote vote every 2 years or 4 years or whatever. And part of the reason why is because technology, right? It took a while to communicate, took a while to get transportation. But if you do it today with modern technology, would you really set up this way, right? I think probably not. You'd probably do it differently, right? If everyone could vote on their phone, you could do a lot more frequent votes. You could do a lot more direct votes for sure, right? And it wouldn't have to be as expensive right now. Right now, it's really expensive to hold these elections, right? To have the integrity of the election kind of solid. But with the fact that everyone has a smartphone now, would you do it the same way? Probably not. You'd probably do a lot more direct democracy versus delegated democracy or representative democracy. I think the thing that I kind of think is neat with cryptocurrencies in general is that I feel like they're almost like supranational, right? In some ways, everyone hopes like one day we have a world where, there's maybe the boundaries of nations kind of melt away, and the capitalist system is used everywhere, and it's kind of and I think you look at some of the largest corporations out there. You look at like Google or Facebook or some of these companies, right? They're almost like their own country in some ways. But cryptocurrency, I think, is a way to almost do some of that, right? Where the values is baked into the software. So, I mean, if we were to think about if we took the Constitution and made it into a DAO, right, into its own operating system for the U.S. economy, it would be tremendous, right? I mean, it would be, maybe you don't need a Supreme Court, right? because it's all in software. I don't know, right? But it's an intriguing idea, right? Of if you just start a nation today. So let's say one day we colonize Mars, would the Constitution be on a piece of paper or would it be a piece of software code, right? I don't know. It might be better
probably
to be
both. Yeah, it would probably require some axioms or initial kind of not laws, but just general statements that govern the is it the Bill of Rights that has about 10 or so just kind of general statements that indicate these are the core values of the country, and I take it in governing Mars it would be a similar kind of start to that Constitution, and then to end up enforcing those values, we get into the software piece where we can encode some of these actions where that's where it starts to really reflect the activity of these values, and it's enforceable through this code in a much more effective and direct way than just electing people to enforce their interpretation of the laws. It's actually a working organism that can be amended and enforced without anyone's perspective, subjective perspective, tweaking or adjusting that initial interpretation.
Yeah. Do you ever listen to the podcast Planet Money?
No, I'll check it out.
So it's a good podcast. They talk about economics type stuff, and one episode on there they had this story about guessing the weight of a cow. Okay, so they had the weight of this cow, and you're supposed to guess how much weight. If you ask me how much of the cow, I'm not on a farm, so I have no idea, right?
Yeah, it's like if you've ever seen the jelly beans, how many jelly beans are in this jar,
So what's interesting is in this thing, they had people guess on how much the cow weighs, right? And then we're talking about the modern age. We're not talking about like, the 1800s when everyone had a cow, right? What was interesting was that the average guess was almost dead on. Okay, and so the thing that, I guess my point here is, the thing about representative democracy is that even though each person may not be that smart or may not be that accurate, the average actually tends to be not bad, right? And so, in fact, I think, and it's been a while since I listened to this podcast, but it was interesting because I think the average was actually more accurate than an expert, like a farmer, or for like a farmer to guess, you probably could guess pretty accurately, right? And so I think that's the beauty of democracy. Well, I think democracy has two things that's good. One thing is that you get people's buy-in. By people voting, you get their buy-in, right? But the second thing is it's kind of like a collective wisdom of the crowd, right, so to speak. But what happens though is, with our current system, people aren't really incentivized to do what's best for society. What they're incentivized to do is to do to get elected, right? I mean, so rather than, like, if people were going to guess the weight of a cow, and it's going to affect whether they stay in office or not, they're going to guess very differently than if they were just trying to really guess like how much does that cow weigh, right? You have this distortion, right, in their decision making, and so it was funny because I was, I'm running for Congress. I've been knocking on doors, and one door I knocked on was someone who previously supported me for my city council race, but they said, Greg, you're not a political wheel and dealer, right? You pretty much, I vote very independently. I vote purely based on data. Like I'm an engineer, right? I'm Caltech Berkeley, right? So I'm very much vote just purely based on what does the evidence show, right? I don't play the politics that much. I don't like. If it's good, I'll vote for it. If it's bad, I'll not vote for it. I don't care who came up with the idea. I want the best ideas to move forward. But like the person told me that they weren't going to vote for me because I didn't play the political games, right? I wasn't the wheel and dealer that could convince people of this thing or that thing. But to me, that's distortion. The way a democracy really works would be if everyone votes in terms of what they truly believe was the best interest of the country. Because then you get this kind of planet money, guess the cow weight thing, right? But when people don't, right? When people are playing games, like right now in Congress, people are playing games. It's like red team versus blue team, right? And there's all this. Like I bet you some of the people on the blue team think that some of the ideas from the red team are good, and vice versa, right? But because there's this gamesmanship of like, okay, who could play more political gamesmanship? People aren't voting logically, right? You get this impasse, right? And so to me, it was kind of funny that, one of my previous supporters told me that, oh no, I'm not going to support you because I don't believe you're a wheel and dealer enough. In some ways, really, what should be happening is they should be voting people in who are not political, who are just purely looking at the data and voting based on that, not on what party or what quid pro quo we have to do, what back we have to scratch. We should be voting things on the merits, purely on the merits, right? And I wish, this is one reason why I'm running, because I wish the people in office would do this, right? Not based on what gets them elected, not based on what favor they have to repay or what favor they want to get, but based on really what's the best, right? And this is what irks me. But it's funny, though, that people kind of, in some ways, they want their politician to be more politically influential than other people by, in some ways, compromising the integrity of their decision making. And to me, it's corruption, right? It's corruption of the system, right? We should want and that's the nice thing about direct democracy is that, no one's doing this to get elected or to be popular or whatever. It's just purely based on the right decision. And that's the beauty of direct democracy versus, having elected officials. Elected officials will sometimes do really screwy decisions that make no real sense, but they do it because they're trying to get a political favor, right? And to me, we should, and I think this is something in the early days of the country, they were debating whether there should be political parties. In some way, there really shouldn't be, right? Everyone, whether they're Democrat or Republican, should be voting on what's best, right? What they truly believe is best, not based on, I'm on the red team, so I can only vote for red, or I'm on the blue team, you can only vote for blue, because then you lead to really suboptimal decisions for the country. And so, I hope that there will be more people elected who vote based on truly what they believe is the best, right? Based on the data, and the evidence, on the research that they've done, versus just on, oh, that senator gave me a favor, so I got to pay him back. That is such a screwball. That's why we have like these massive screwball legislations, because of this kind of stuff, right? It's because we don't have people doing what's right.
Yeah, it's a breeding grounds for corruption, it's like you're saying. It's I scratch your back, you scratch mine. All of a sudden, we have this network of those who are scratching each other's backs, and now you have teams that start to form and scratch each other's backs, and you have the red team and the blue team. They scratch each other's backs, but they don't scratch cross team, because that would upset their team. Why are you scratching that team's back when I'm on your team and you're not scratching mine? It's inclusive. It's exclusive, and it's a closed off circle of people that are making the majority of the decisions without the majority of the opinions and the information. Like you're saying, the party system is starting to break apart. Really, it's starting to become more fragmented into an ideological system where people are voting based on their beliefs. I got to say, I have ideas, back and forth, but ultimately, as a crypto supporter, I'm going to vote for the initiatives that I have and kind of what impacts me the most. And we've seen crypto kind of as a unification between these parties. There's certainly resistance on either side, but there's also support on either side as well. That kind of does indicate that there's ideological aspects and points that are out there that are important to people that kind of transcend the emotional attachment and affiliation that people have to their party. That allegiance, that blind allegiance, seems to lead people astray, and throw it seems to push people in the direction of voting emotionally rather than logically, which is generating some of these short-sighted results and consequences that are creating lasting issues.
I bet you if the Planet Money did the same experiment, guess 𝗰𝗶𝗃𝗃, but it was like among elected officials where they're jockeying to get reelected, or some sort of political favor, the weight of the cow will be way off, right? because they're not trying to get the right weight, right? They're not optimizing for the right thing.
Yeah, and these kind of relationships are, how influence is transmitted. The incentive of, if I vote in this certain direction, maybe this person's going to scratch my back in the future. That probably isn't going anywhere. It's the fact that it's contained to a closed-off circle of people that is condensing the power in this circle and not distributing it evenly across the entire population. If we had the same, incentives that if any ordinary person can get their back scratched, it does seem like a more fair system.
Well, I just feel like the vote should be purely based on the merits, right? Not based on who you owe a favor to, right? It should be, if our Congress people, right, if our president voted purely based on the merits, right, not on, I want to get this through, so I'm going to vote yes on this thing which I don't like, but I'm going to vote yes just because, But if we really did where it was based on purely on what's going to be best for this country, we would have much better laws, much better legislation, right? But because we have this kind of really weird system, it causes distortions, right?
Yeah.
We have these laws that don't make sense.
Yeah, and the thought experiment of colonizing and governing Mars, I think really does give us an indication of how things are happening.
You probably don't want to do the same system that we do here, right? You probably
Why do we want to keep a stale system around if there's a better system out there. You know, any day we can start from scratch, and you know, it's always an opportunity to instantiate a better system. You know, each day is a new day. You don't have to pick up on the poor negative feedback loop that compounds over and over of a ineffective system. You know, each day we have the opportunity to change that system and progress in a more favorable direction. Greg, it's been a super great conversation, man.
I enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you, Rob.
Over. Yeah, I really appreciate you coming on, and you know, I'm sure we could have gone another hour, whether it's in tokenized economies and what the world looks like with Bitcoin as a reserve currency or CBDCs as reserve currencies, you know, private stable coins, in conjunction with some of these central bank digital currencies, and you know, other use cases beyond financial of smart contracts and distributed ledger technology. You're invited back, man. You're always welcome on DeFi Slate, and really appreciate you coming on today, man.
Thank you for your work. Really appreciate it, Rob.
Yeah. If you have any closing thoughts, you know, go ahead and share, and how can our audience support and you know, kind of reach out if they have questions or just stay in the loop?
Yeah, you know, definitely. So follow me on Twitter. It's this at Greg Tanaka, one word. You know, we need all the support we can get. We have, you know, being an incumbent is really hard because as an incumbent, they actually get taxpayer dollar to basically campaign, right? Because they can send mailings out to their constituents on the taxpayer dollars. So it's really hard to be an incumbent, especially one that's been in office for 30 years. But if you guys want to see more rational legislation, if you want to see crypto not go to jail next year, because next year the Treasury Department is going to be rolling out its provisions on the infrastructure bill, which basically makes all of us criminals. You know, please check out my campaign, support any way you can. Of course, you could donate. That would be great. If you know, you could volunteer for the campaign, you could, in the district, you could vote for the campaign, you could volunteer. I mean, there's so many different ways to help. You can simply just retweet what the campaign puts out, but we'd definitely appreciate everyone's support.
Awesome.
And my website is just simply gregtanaka.org.
gregtanaka.org. Great. Yeah, degens are not criminals. Vote for Greg.
Thank you.
Cheers,
Thank you, Rob. Appreciate it. Okay, have a great day.